Recording has started and knit all. All right, just give me. Simone, I'm just going to unmute you. All right. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Should we get started? Okay. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're calling in. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Simone Pinheiro, and on behalf of Tango Mercurio, I wanted to welcome every single one of you to our online seminar program. If you don't know us, Tango Mercurio is an arts education organization with the mission of promoting cultural understanding and social cohesion through Argentine tango. We do that through dance, music, learning, and opportunities for community engagement. In ordinary times, we're a vibrant organization with lots going on, but of course, we're not living in ordinary times. And during this global pandemic, Tango Mercurio has been coordinating this online seminar program to help us keep ourselves connected, engaged, and to keep the conversations about tango and the learning about tango going until we're able to meet with one another and dance with one another again. So welcome everyone. I wanted to say that during the month of April, if you've been joining us, we're here every Sunday at 5 p.m. If you've been tuning in every Sunday, we've been offering panels, discussions, lectures by really leading experts in the field of a variety of topics related to tango. So thank you for accompanying us during this journey. And I wanted to also let you know that our May program is on our website. ZAP is finalized, so check our website, www.tangomercurio.org, to see what's coming up in May. We're here every Sunday at 5 p.m. except for next Sunday. It's 3 p.m. to accommodate the speaker, otherwise 5 p.m. So this is it. Welcome, everyone. And I wanted to turn it into Flora. Flora Lee is the president of our chair of board of directors. She has many talents. She's also a tango dancer and a tango musician, and she's going to be moderating the session today. And I'll let her introduce our speaker. Thank you, Dr. Luker, for speaking with us and participating in the program. And thank you, Flora, for moderating. All yours.
Thank you so much, Simone, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see you all here. We have well over 70 participants. It's really good to have you here today. So welcome to Tango Mercurio's 4th online seminar entitled The History of Tango Music Beyond the Golden Age. And we have a very special guest for you today. I'm very excited. We have Professor Morgan Luker, and I will introduce him shortly. Just before that, I'm Flora Lee, and I'm the board chair for Tango Mercurio. And 2 years ago, I had the privilege to attend Tango for Musician, Reed's intensive summer program. And during my week at Reed College, I took Professor Morgan Luker class, The History of Tango. And I loved it. And ever since I came back from Reed, I wanted to bring Professor Luker in front of our audience. So let me tell you, this is a real treat today to have him with us. So we're going to get started shortly, but before that, I just want to cover a few housekeeping things. So first of all, today's session is going to be interactive. So about halfway through Professor Luker's presentation, we're going to have a small group discussion. So what that means is that if you're not on camera at that point, we're going to put you in breakouts, and ideally you would want to be on camera. So I wanted to give you a heads up. We're also recording the session today. Only the main screen is going to be recorded, but I just wanted to give everybody a heads up. We will play some music clips throughout this presentation. Professor Luker has some great things for you today. I want to ask you to be patient with me. I will be managing the clips and the technology. Everything should go smoothly, but if for some reason there's some challenges, just be patient. Things should resolve really quickly. Another thing is some of the recordings that we're going to play today are pretty old. They can sound a little staticky. Don't adjust your Wi-Fi connection. They're meant to sound that way, and Professor Luker will tell you more about them. All right, now I'm going to put just a few resources in the chat for you for this session. And most importantly, you will have in the chat you will see a link that I just posted in the chat. This is a link to a Google document that has all of the links to the recordings that we're going to play and more. You don't need that list to follow along today. We just wanted to make sure that you have access to it for future reference. And also we're going to play short clips, so about 30 seconds to a minute of the pieces today. If you want to listen more, you will have everything in that document. So if you want to follow along, you can. All right. We're also going to have a Q&A with Professor Luker throughout the session. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. All right, enough housekeeping things. The first thing I want to do before we turn it over to Professor Luker is to hear from you. So if you haven't done it already, I would love the participants to introduce themselves in the chat. Very simple, just a few sentences. Your name, where you're from, and your favorite tango piece or artist. If you can, try not to press enter. Try to fight the urge to press enter. It's okay if you've already posted it, don't worry about it. But if you can, now just take a few minutes to write you a little introduction. All right. I hope you've had a chance to write your little intro. Now, I would like to ask everybody to press enter now. Beautiful. Now, I would like you to take a few minutes to scroll in the chat and see who else is here for this presentation today. Beautiful, everybody. Thank you so much for your participation. All right, so the objective of our session today is to talk about tango music, but we know that dancers are mostly familiar with tangos from the golden age. That's what dancers dance to most of the time at milongas. We have the great opportunity to have an expert in tango music, Professor Luker, and he will talk about earlier tangos as well as the contemporary tango scene. So this is the objective for today. We hope that we can spark your curiosity to look into a wide range of tango music. All right, now it's a time to introduce Professor Luker. Professor Luker is an associate professor of music at Reed College. He has a PhD in ethnomusicology from Columbia University. He's also the author of the book, The Tango Machine, Musical Culture in the Age of Expediency. And of course, he is the founding director of Tango for Musicians at Reed College. It's a week-long intensive program over the summer that brings musicians from all around the world. And I have to tell you, I attended the program 2 years ago, and I can say without exaggeration, that was one of the highlights of my life. It's an amazing experience. So without further ado, Professor Luker, I will turn the floor to you. I should unmute you first.
Yeah.
Unmute, here you are.
Hello, everybody. Thank you to Flora and to Simone and to everyone at Tango Mercurio for inviting me here. I'm really happy to be here and happy to be able to talk to you. It's a really great opportunity for me to speak to a broader audience and, hopefully answer some of your questions. We'll have some time for that as well. Today, the goal, as Flora already said, is to kind of cover some of the general features and themes and issues in tango music, both past and present, using the Golden Age style from the 1940s and 50s as a kind of pivot point. And I'm assuming, I know the audience here is really diverse. I can't see hardly any of you, just so you know, so I'm kind of looking at myself and talking to myself. Given that this is a tango organization that invited me to do this, I'm kind of assuming that many of you are tango social dancers, going to milongas. The music that's danced in those spaces is the so-called golden age music from Argentina from the 1940s and 50s. And so I'm not going to assume too much familiarity with that, but use that as a bit of a pivot point. The most general thing to say about tango music is that it has a really, really rich and diverse history to it, right? We think of tango as dancing, or many people are familiar with Astor Piazzolla and his work. Tango as music is something that has this history that goes back well over 100 years, 120 years now, with trends, counter trends, subgenres, ruptures, returns, reinventions, all these kinds of things going back in a continuous history for that long. And the history of tango dance and tango music have come together and have separated and have reemerged and have gone in different directions over that amount of time, which leads to today, many people who are interested in tango dancing don't know so much about tango music, and vice versa. A lot of people who are interested in tango music don't necessarily do tango dancing. And this is a point to have some connection between that here. So the organization is going to be done taking the golden age as our pivot point. The first half of what I'm going to present is going to be earlier history, before the golden age, leading to the golden age. And then, as Flora said, we'll take a little break and have some questions and have some activities. And then in the second half, I'll talk about contemporary tango trends and how they've received what's happened since the golden age and things that are happening today. And my goal here is to kind of, again, just introduce you to artists and ideas and places and people, but also issues and like why this stuff matters to think about tango history. So with that, I'm going to launch right into it. We do have a number of listening examples. As Flora said, we're only going to be playing short excerpts here. We do have the playlist on the Google document that Flora created for you to be able to return to this material on your own time, because as you know, there's a lot of information in a single example, and it's a chance for you to to kind of go back and catch things that you maybe didn't hear the first time around, especially given the sound over Zoom and all those kinds of things. Okay, so part one, before the golden age. Where did tango come from, right? How did it develop? What can this tell us about social life and history in the first part of the 20th century? I'm not gonna get into the details of this, and a lot of the details about the kind of origin points of tango are quite underdocumented or controversial or other things like that. But I really want to think about like broader trends and areas and issues to think about with tango. But let's start with the golden age just to get that sound in our ear. And for this, we're going to play an excerpt of the Carlos de Sarli rendition of the piece El Choclo from 1954. I'm going to say a few things about it before you hear it, but this is going to be very typical golden age tango dance orquesta sound. You're going to hear the driving tango rhythm, these marcato accompaniment patterns, which are like the strong emphasis on the downbeats. You'll hear the instrumentation that's associated with Golden Age tango, which means bandoneon sections, which is the button squeeze box instrument of tango, string section, piano, bass, the larger ensemble that's known as an orquesta típica, which is essentially a tango big band with section-based instrumentation. Stylistically, you'll hear things like juxtaposition of really intense, almost violent articulations with florid melodic lines. And what I think of as this really great, like kind of poised intensity of Golden Age tango in general, where it's very polished, very refined, but also kind of ready and raring to go. So Flora, if you could play an excerpt of this, that would be great. Okay, great, thank you. A little bit of static on the line with the sound, but again, we all appreciate your patience with that. And again, you can return to the examples as needed. So again, this is a sound that for those of you who are dancers, you probably are aware of this actual recording and aware of this piece. It's called the Golden Age of Tango because this was the period in Argentina in the 1940s and 1950s in which tango was like the epicenter of participatory popular culture in Argentina. Somewhat akin to the big band era of jazz in the United States, where it's like popular music, popular movies, dancing, all these kinds of things like revolved around tango in this time period. And it's recordings from this period, which were, you know, sophisticated, largely instrumental music for dancing. The historical sound recordings remain in circulation today for dancers. And again, the sound you hear here is a typical Golden Age sound. One thing that I want to use as a pivot point for turning into earlier history, though, is where do we get to this sound? How do we get there? Is by taking the piece itself that they're playing, which is the composition El Choclo, or the Corn Cob, by this guy Angel Villoldo, whose dates are from 1861 to 1919. He wrote this piece in 1903. So this is a very older piece, already something that had been in circulation for more than 50 years at the time when de Sarli recorded it. And the piece, for those of you who know tango, it's almost like a tango cliche at this point, where it's like it's a song that's heard so much and so often and so diversely that we almost don't want to hear it anymore. But I think it's actually a really great point of reference for tracing some of the development of tango and bringing out some of the key themes that I'm interested in here. So for a very radical kind of sonic departure from what we just heard, I'm going to ask Flora to play a recording that I found in my archival work on early tango history that I'm doing now for my research. At the Sound Archive at the University of California, Santa Barbara. They have Villoldo's own recording of this piece, which is from roughly 1912-ish or so quite old. And as Flora said before, this is a historical sound recording. It's very scratchy. It's kind of hard to hear through the static, so to speak. And again, I encourage you to return to the recording of it here. But let's just put this on, so to speak, and hear how different this is from what we just heard.
Vamos a ver, hermanito, cántenos el tanguito El Choclo que dice que ha compuesto. Voy a ver si me acuerdo, muchachos. Y de un grano nace la planta que más sabe. Dijo que estaba un bichoco, y yo como no soy otro, más que un tanguerón de fama, murmuró con alboroto, está muy de la banana, hay choclos que tienen las espigas de oro, que son las que adoro, con tierna pasión, cuando trabajando, derecho de abrojo, estoy en rastrojo, como mi campeón, hay choclos que tienen.
Okay, again, just a short excerpt there, but that'll give you the idea. It actually sounds pretty good. Aside from that static that comes through every once in a while, the quality is quite high here in the digitization. This, as you already heard, just immediately you hear is a radical departure from the Desarli Golden Age sound, right? This suddenly is just a voice and a guitar. It has lyrics. It's really a song, right? A song to be sung, a song to understand the words, a song to consume in that way. You hear a habanera rhythmic orientation here, which you do not hear in the Golden Age sound very much. The habanera being this rhythm, bum, 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 bum. The habanera itself was a kind of transnational popular form between Europe and Cuba and Latin America in the 19th century. And really the early definition of tango as music is taking a habanera rhythm and putting a three-part form to it, and that's what early tango was, and that's what you're hearing here. The performance itself is really interesting, and Villolo is a fascinating figure. You probably know him as the composer of El Choclo, but he was also an actor, a writer, a comedian, a clown, a handyman. He did all kinds of stuff. And that's one of the things that I find interesting about him, where it's not just that he's like a foundational figure in tango in general, but it's part of a much broader kind of scene of popular culture making in Buenos Aires at this time at the turn of the century. You hear that a little bit in this recording in the sense that it has not just the sound itself, not just, the disc is not just a container for the music, but is really a kind of a spoken performance, if you will. It has this short introduction that you may or may not have heard, where it's almost setting the stage as if this were in a theatrical presentation where someone comes to Villolo and is like, hey, Angel, play us that old song of yours. We'd love to hear it again. And he says, oh, well, let's see if I even remember it, right? Here we go, let me try it. That, of course, is a tongue-in-cheek kind of self-referential thing to himself, because the piece is not old when he's composing it, and in fact, it's world famous at this time, right? But it gives this kind of informal, even comic performance to what he's doing. And again, speaks to tango within the larger kind of entertainment industry at the time. The other thing I want to make with the point I want to make with this recording is that the guitar performance, guitar is a major tango instrument and has been from the very beginning. The guitar is a major popular instrument all over the world, right? And in Latin America in particular, you could make the argument that the guitar is effectively an indigenous instrument in certain ways too, because of the depth of the colonial experience there. The thing that I find interesting, if you listen to the details of this performance, he's clearly performing a habanera rhythm, but his performance practice and his performance style on the guitar speak as much to kind of different kinds of local folkloric forms in Argentina at this time as they do to transnational trends in popular music from the late 19th, early 20th century when Villolo was working. And again, he died in 1919, and by that time, tango was already a very large transnational form. So one of the themes that I want you to take from this session today, in this recording, is that early tango is not just a thing from a place that's contained in Argentina and unrelated to other kinds of genres, but something that has this kind of relationality built into it already, where it develops from the immigrant experience, from the colonial experience, from local culture in Argentina, and circulates far beyond that. And that's part of what makes it what it is from the very, very beginning. We can bring this out even more in the next example I want to play, which is another rendition of El Choclo, this one by a group called the Banda Española, roughly 1908 or so. So again, another very early historic sound recording that's clearly the same piece, right? The same composition, but also really different in lots of ways too. So Flora, if you could play that, and then I'll talk about it a little bit too.
El choclo, tango criollo del conocido autor argentino Ángel Villoldo, ejecutado por la famosa banda Colombia, dirigida por su maestro Prof.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here. So on the one hand, this is clearly, again, the same piece. And I'm kind of, again, relying somewhat on your knowledge of El Choclo as an example. And again, you can return to the examples later if you want. But again, it's totally different from what we heard before. In this case, the most striking thing for me is just the radically different instrumentation that we hear, right? Between the Desarli piece, that's the kind of tango orchestra, to the Vijolo piece, that's just voice and guitar, to this, where you really have a John Philip Sousa style wind band, right? Like a military wind band. That was one of the most popular public forms of music making during the 19th century in the United States and elsewhere, right? You have a lot of early historic sound recordings or historical sound recordings from this time period. This is what's known as the acoustic era, before they invented microphones, where everything was recorded directly into a horn and then scratched into the disc. A lot of early historical sound recordings feature this kind of instrumentation, both because it was popular, but also because it recorded really well. So you can hear a lot of detail here that you don't necessarily in other things. Musically, with this example though, you also again hear the habanera rhythm, which is a bit more square sounding here, I would argue, than you hear in the kind of give and take or swing that we associate with Golden Age tango, but clearly pointing to tango with the habanera rhythm. And then also with the spoken introduction, we again have that here in this recording. There was a bit of distortion during it. But for those of you who are Spanish speakers, you can go and return to this as well. But it's really, really super interesting because it gives a lot of clues to what this recording actually is. First of all, it does introduce the piece as a tango criollo, meaning a Creole or Argentine tango, by the famous Argentine, the very famous Argentine composer Angel Villoldo, right? So it's placing Villoldo as an author of this piece that's circulating more broadly. Now, again, on the label of this recording, it says this is the group, the Banda Española, which is another name, or how to say it, the alias, an alias name for the Colombia band, the Banda Colombia, which is what they actually say in the spoken introduction, which is the house band of Columbia Records during the early 20th century, that was directed by this man named Charles Prince, who was a kind of a peer of Sousa's and a really important figure in the early development of the recording industry in the United States. This piece, in other words, is recorded by a US-based wind band under the direction of an American player, recorded in New Jersey for a Spanish-speaking market, right? Because it has a Spanish language introduction to it, but speaks also again to the broader circulation of tango in this early period. This recording, as far as I know, though I'm not exactly sure, is older than the Villoldo recording, okay, in terms of chronology. It's very difficult to do the certain chronology of the early historical recordings, but it's something that is kind of, you know, contemporaneous with the Villoldo one. So it's important that we don't hear the Villoldo piece as like the first example or the original example. These things are all happening at the same time and circulating in different places. And again, the point that I think is really interesting for us now, just to think about broad swaths of tango history, is just how truly transnational tango was as a form. There's a moment in tango history called the Parisian tango craze that happened in the years leading up to World War I, before World War I. And this is when, like, you know, the elites of Paris, the kind of the upper middle class people in Paris and the lower, it's actually very diverse. But Europeans got fascinated with tango in this moment, and it became like a huge fad, both in terms of dancing, in terms of music, in terms of images, in terms of ideas, in terms of colors, of fashion, all kinds of things. And the epicenter of this was in Paris, France, which was kind of the cultural capital of the universe at the time, but it spread far beyond that into the United States, throughout Europe, and even beyond in different places. And tango was the key part of this. It's interesting in that way because tango as a genre was one of the first truly transnational forms of popular music. This is before jazz became an international genre. This is before samba became an international genre. This is before a lot of the kind of forms that we think of being early genres, transnational genres were happening. No, tango is basically the first. Tango and Hawaiian music, actually. And then the other thing is that I think is interesting here is to think about, you know, Argentine tango beyond Argentina. Right, we think of it as Argentine tango. We think of Buenos Aires and the River Plate region of Argentina and Uruguay being the kind of cradle of the genre, which it very much is. But this example of the Columbia Band and many, many more like it coming from this time period are not anomalies at all. right? This is in fact a total central part of what tango is and what it was and where it came from and what was happening with it in the history and development. And I think that's really important for us to think about it. In that sense, tango is a great example of the kind of what I call with my students, the kind of creative misunderstandings of place and culture and style and music, right? Like this is a connection to Visuodo, but also a departure from it in all kinds of important ways. And that's a lot of where what tango is and what it does came from, okay? To conclude this first section, and I believe I'm pretty much on time still, though Flora, you know to like do the cut, right? If I'm not.
You're on time, or Professor Luker, you can keep going for a few more minutes, and we have one more.
For once in my life, right? And like all good professors, I love the sound of my own voice, so I keep going. Anyway, the diversity of early tango music during the Parisian tango craze period and before that is tremendously exciting, and I encourage you to explore it. The website where we've gotten these historic recordings from is called the DAR, the Discography of American Historical Recordings from the University of California, Santa Barbara. There's a lot of really wonderful information on there, many audio files, and I encourage you to check this out. This is not the kind of stuff that you just find on YouTube. It's really very rare. And it's fun. And my current research is based in that archive down there. But to return it to our story here, I want to bring things back to Argentina and play another example of El Choclo by the Orquesta Típica Victor, which you may or may not have heard of, but this is an emblematic ensemble of the so-called Guardia Nueva period or New Guard period in tango music history, which is going to sound a lot more familiar to many of you who are already tango dancers or familiar with Golden Age sound. So this recording is from 1929. This is an electric recording, so after the inventions of microphones, and sounds a lot clearer for that reason, though still pretty scratchy compared to what we're used to today. And you'll hear the kind of typical things that we'd associate with tango instrumental music for dancing that as it develops, right? Things like instrumentation, strings, bandoneon, piano, bass, the rhythmic orientation going from habanera to marcados and to the other rhythmic accompaniment patterns that you hear in tango, a kind of expanding sense of virtuosity within what are still pretty straightforward kind of formal features of the genre, et cetera, et cetera. And the other kind of contextual thing that I want to say about this group is that it also speaks to the continued significance of the commercial cultural industries in the development of tango, right? Tango is commercial music. And it was existing in order to kind of meet the need of audiences, both buying recordings, dancing, sheet music, radio, film, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is produced in order to meet the demands of a popular audience, right? And this group is really interesting in that regard because it was, again, like the Banda Colombia or the Banda Española, the Orquesta Típica Victor was the house band of Victor Records. Now, Victor Records is like the transnational company of the early recording industry, right? That became RCA Victor and RCA and other things like that. They had a local branch in Argentina. They opened a branch in Argentina to compete with a local record label called Disco Nacional, basically to kind of try to corner the, Disco Nacional had the local market for tango more or less cornered, and Victor wanted to, like, you know, get in on that, as they say. So this band is interesting because they were, they only recorded, they never performed live. It wasn't like an artist who was featuring their work on their records that they were made, but a group that was formed in order to make records and make things to be sold. So let's hear this example, Flora, and then we can take a break. Great. So anyway, I could go on and on about that, but for the sake of time, Flora, let's move on to the next activity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that first presentation. I want to invite people to ask questions in the chat. We have a few minutes set aside if you have questions for Professor Luker. We had Simone ask when the first recordings were from. So I think you said 1905, 1908, the first, the two earliest recordings.
Oh, it's actually hard to tell. Roughly late 1900s, teens. The first commercial sound recording was made in Argentina, I want to say in 1902. The first commercial sound recording of tango was made in 1905. The actual first ever sound recordings made of tango, this is a fun fact for you all, were made by a German anthropologist living in Argentina at the time as ethnographic field recordings. He recorded indigenous music and local popular music. Robert Lehman Nietzsche was his name, and I've written about him a little bit in my academic work. The Visuolo recording is sometime between 1912 and 1919, which is when he died. But beyond that, I'm not sure. So.
All right, we have a few more questions coming in. Harvey asks, what was the name of the other, I'm sorry, it keeps moving. When did manufacturers begin to distribute bandoneons to Argentina?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a really great question. And I wish I knew a better answer to it because I'm really interested in kind of tango, the material culture of tango. And bandoneons as the kind of emblematic tango instruments are famously originally from Germany and only manufactured in Germany until just recently. Actually, in about the last 10 years, they started manufacturing them in Argentina locally. The first ones would have been imported to Argentina, I would say, in the late 19th century, though I don't have a specific date. And I think they came along with kind of immigrating people. In terms of, it becomes incorporated into tango around the time period we're talking about. And in terms of like a kind of deliberate export market from Germany to Argentina, I can't speak to that in detail, but I would be fascinated to know more about it.
Great, thank you. Let me ask you a few more. What was the name of the other orchestra in the Argentine market around the time of OTV? The Orchestra Típica Victor. Yeah, what was the name of the other orchestra you said?
Oh, well, there's the Orquesta Típica Victor. I don't think I mentioned a different name. There's a lot of other figures from there. Julio De Caro is like the emblematic figure of Guardia Nueva Tango, if that's what the question is. The other label I mentioned is Disco Nacional, and that's a record label that most of Carlos Gardel's music is on, a lot of Roberto Firpo's music is on, a lot of like the early history of tango, not the earliest, but things from the 1920s. And Disco Nacional was the first, a local subsidiary of Odeon Records, which was a German company, transnational company, but they were the first group to set up a pressing plant, a record pressing plant in Argentina, and kind of cornered the market there.
All right, Marla asks, did you mention something about Hawaiian music being amongst the first international music?
Yes, I did, and believe it or not, yes. There was, and again, this is a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but basically, the World Fair in San Francisco in what year, 19 something, which I don't remember off the top of my head, had a Hawaiian pavilion and Hawaiian music. There was a craze for Hawaiian music in the turn of the century around the same time period. And it became something that circulated very, very broadly all over the world. And again, in ways that are unexpected, like, the slide guitar is a Hawaiian that gets incorporated into country music, gets incorporated into other things. And it's a fascinating history, that coincides with the time in which the United States was, let's just say it was kind of taking over Hawaii, and Hawaii was getting incorporated into the kind of, global market for cultural difference and economics and all this stuff there. There's a really fascinating book that many of you would probably be interested in that talks a lot about tango, though it's not directly about tango. In fact, I have it right here. It's on my desk. But this book, Noise Uprising, by a guy, Michael Denning, and we can send this around maybe on the list too. This speaks a lot to this early time period of music history and to Hawaiian music in general, and a lot of other genres, actually. It's very fascinating.
Good. Corey asks, so the last recording we listened from the Orchestra Tipica Victor has bandoneons. At what point does that become a standard thing, and does it replace winds and brass, or is there some overlap?
I guess, okay, that's another good question. The bandoneon, the standard story is that the bandoneon comes to tango instrumental music relatively late, where like the earliest ensembles were guitar and flute and those kinds of instruments, violin. And then you have the bandoneon getting incorporated later that tends to, so the story goes, tends to replace the flute, right? And the bandoneon is a very diverse instrument that can do melodic lines and harmonic lines and intense rhythm and all this stuff. It's like an amazing instrument that can do a lot. The thing that I would say about this though, it's not, in my mind, it's not as much about one instrument replacing another or one kind of ensemble replacing another. It's not a linear story like this. It's really, especially in the early period, it's a kind of mishmash of all kinds of stuff going on simultaneously. By the time you get into the Guardia Nueva, which is mid-1920s into the mid-1930s or beyond, depends on how you think about it. But like Julio De Caro's group, codified the tango sextet of two bandoneones, two string instruments, and piano and bass. And that's what you hear in the Orquesta Tipica Victor, though they tend to add even more, kind of building the sound that becomes a kind of Orquesta Tipica sound, which will have as many as 12 or 15 musicians in it. So I would say it doesn't replace things, but that instrumentation in the bandoneon in particular becomes a kind of standard tango instrument, certainly by the mid-1920s, if not even before that.
Wonderful. Okay, next question from Steve. I thought I heard a flute in the Banda Española recording. Was flute an indigenous tango instrument?
You certainly do hear flutes. In the Banda Española, you hear the kind of full military wind band, which is wind instruments, brass instruments of all kinds, an ensemble that, I don't know how many people they had in that actual recording, but pretty large groups, right, that were meant for playing outside, either marching or other kinds of listening music. The flute, as I guess the question was, is it indigenous to tango? Hard to talk about what indigenous means vis-a-vis tango, but as it's certainly used in early tango music. The flute is one of the earliest instruments you hear in early recordings. But again, you want to, I encourage people to think about it, or my argument is that it's like, the John Philip Sousa style American wind band is as indigenous to tango music as the bandoneon or as any other thing that we associate with like local practice in Argentina. And that's part of the argument about it circulating so broadly and hearing these other things. So on the one hand, yes, absolutely, flute is an early and important tango instrument, the Western metal flute. On the other hand, it's like, there's kind of no such thing, and like anything and everything goes with tango, even in this early time period.
Great. Question from Ramu. What were the songs that the German musicologist recorded?
Great question. Oh boy, he has a number of, well, the one, how to say it, it's this guy named Robert Limanici. He recorded a bunch of wax cylinder recordings. They're all stored in Germany. They've been, a 2 CD set was recently produced. In fact, I have that right here with me too. I'm really busting out my professor time here. And these are historical sound recordings from this time period. One disc is indigenous music, one disc is popular music. And he records a couple of Villoldo songs. There's actually El Porteñito, if you know that song, is on here. A couple other things like that. But then a lot of the other popular music that's included in this recording is other genres as well. He's got El Porteñito. He's got 2 tangos, El Baile en la de Tranquilí, etc. A couple other things. So this is something I encourage you to look up. And again, I'm happy to kind of circulate things. This particular recording is kind of hard to find, as you might imagine, but it's fascinating and really, really interesting.
Great, we will definitely add that to the resources. All right, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Vanessa asks, what drove the changing instrumentation in tango music, flute guitar to bandoneon piano, from the early 1900s to the 1930s?
What changed the, okay.
What drove that change? What was the driver?
Yeah, okay, here's my interpretation, and I may or may not be right. And like, again, the early history of tango, I mean, it's complicated. It's not, Who really knows, I guess. But my reading of it is, you know, tango, like I was saying, is functional music. It goes from music that's kind of for listening to music for dancing and back and forth in other different ways. But as tango music becomes music that's more for dancing, my understanding and my kind of interpretation of it is that these ensembles become larger. They come to have instruments that have more volume. The bandoneon, for those of you who play or have heard it play, is quite a loud instrument compared even to the flute or something like that, certainly compared to the guitar. The ensembles tend to get bigger because they're filling more space. They're moving more bodies. They have to rock the party, right? They have to rock the house. And this is a time in which they don't have microphones, you know, they don't have any kind of sound reinforcement technology. If you're filling a room full of dancing, moving bodies and you need to fill it with sound, the bands get bigger and bigger and bigger. Such to, by the point in even the late 1930s into the 1940s, when you have the Orquesta Típica as a tango big band, more or less standardized for tango dance music, but not for other kinds of tango music. That's my reading of it, as part of just to have more volume, more sound, more energy to it. Now, again, the Orquesta Típica also, because it's sectionally based, has different instrumentation like that. It's like a real orchestra where it just gives you more musical possibilities as well. But that's my understanding of it there. And the other thing to say too is, like, you know, the bandoneon is a complicated instrument, but it's portable. Piano's an incredibly expensive instrument that is not portable. You know, there's those kinds of like economic things into it, as well as people moving from one kind of instrument to another in this early time period.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your questions, everybody. That was great. So we're going to take a little break here and we're going to do something fun and a little different. We're going to do our small group discussion. So let me just present my screen here. All right, so what I would like people to do is I'm going to put you in virtual breakout rooms of about 3 people. And I just want you to get a chance to share what was your first ever encounter with tango music. What is your earliest memory of hearing tango music? So just a few points of logistics here. Just give me a few seconds to organize the breakouts, and then you will soon get a little pop-up window that will ask you to join the breakout. Just click on the blue button. Once you're in the breakout, of course, you're going to want to unmute yourself and start your video. If you don't know how to do that and you're new to Zoom, it's in the bottom left corner of your screen. And I'm sure the other people in your breakout will be able to help you. Take 1 minute per person, share your stories, and in about 4 minutes, we're all going to come back here together. So let me just adjust the breakout rooms. I'm going to need 10 seconds here. In the meantime, if you want to jot down some ideas, think about your first memory of tango music, and you're going to be soon on your way. All right, I'm going to send you into breakouts now. See you in a few minutes. Oh. Hi, Eric, you got me. I'm good, how are you? Give me just a second, I'm on 2 computers here, okay? Just give me a second. I hope these breakouts. I was not supposed to be here, so, oh, we have somebody else. Vikas, can you unmute yourself? We have another participant. Can you, Vikas, can you unmute yourself? All right. Is everybody back? I think I am looking for my presenter. Just give me a second here. Morgan Luker. Okay, Morgan, you should be unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, all right. I hope this was fun. There might have been some technical glitches. You might have been stranded a little bit in one of the breakouts, but I hope you had a chance to meet people and exchange your stories about tango music. All right. So we're going to get into the second portion of our little presentation here. But before I do so, I have a little announcement. So we have, I wanted to talk about our speaker next week. We are very privileged to have Michael Lavocat. He is a leading expert on the Golden Age, and he is the author of several books on the topic. And we're very lucky to have him. So he will be with us tomorrow, not tomorrow, next week on Sunday. I would not want to miss it if I were you. All right, well, now we're going to fast forward. We're going to leave the past behind and look towards the future. And Professor Luker, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks, Flora. That breakout thing was cool. That was fun. I met Rafa and Lucas and Henry. Henry was, he's like, I didn't think I'd be in the breakout room with the teacher. And little Lucas was only 8. So shout out to Lucas. Thank you for attending. That's really great. And yeah, this is, so we are going to pivot on into the contemporary period. And this is something that I've worked on for a long time. I wrote a book called The Tango Machine that's about contemporary tango, and is going to be, is a resource for you if you're interested in this. It's really like an anthropology book. So, buyer beware, it's an academic book, but also you'll learn a lot about contemporary tango there. I also want to give a shout out for Michael, who's coming next week. He's like an amazing authority on Golden Age tango, and will make, I imagine, a really nice complement to what I'm doing today, in the sense that he can focus really, really intensely on that one period that I'm kind of glossing and taking for granted today in a lot of ways. But okay, in part 2 here, I'm going to take again about 25 minutes to go through some contemporary trends in tango music. And then, as I said before, where I was saying that tango is this rich and diverse phenomenon that's been around for a long time, and there's so many fascinating things going on with it, that continues to be true today. This discussion is going to be oriented around contemporary tango music in Buenos Aires, which is I have the most knowledge and experience of. But there's contemporary tango music being made all over in the United States, in Europe, in all other places. So it's really a thriving musical genre today, along with being a thriving dance form. So I really do encourage you to check it out and go to the resource page that we put together that has some nice things for you to start with if you're not as familiar with contemporary tango music. Okay. Let me see here and let me check the time. Okay. The first thing I'm going to give about how many? 1, 2, 3, 4 major trends that I want to talk about broadly, and name some specific artists with them, and kind of help you understand what's going on with their music, and kind of, if you like this, then you'll find this and look for other things. But really, I think understanding some of the how and why people are doing this, not just like what is neat about specific pieces. So if you go back to the beginning of what we did today, when Flora first let you all into the discussion room, she was playing this piece, El Choclo. She's playing another rendition of El Choclo by the group El Arranque. And that recording is from 2002, so relatively recent, and is a good example of part of what I want to talk about as like the Uber trend, or the main trend with contemporary tango, is this larger sense of adherence to or departure from tango from the Golden Age and afterwards, in the way that the contemporary generation inherited it, right? And by contemporary generation, I mean people who came of age in the 90s, basically, or came of age in the 80s. There are still master practitioners from the Golden Age, from the vanguard period, from the 60s and 70s, who are still active today, and they're definitely like elder figures who are making amazing music still. And that is by definition contemporary as well, but I'm talking about a generation that's a couple generations younger than them, okay? What's interesting about El Choclo, and again, you can return to that when you have the chance, the El Arranque version, how it illustrates what I'm talking about. One thing is in terms of musical sound and style, right? They have the typical tango instruments. They are using the tango rhythmic resources. They're developing the melodic interpretive style and interpretation and these kinds of things, the repertoire. The fact that they're still playing El Choclo, the piece is literally 100 years old at the point when they are recording it, right? Like that's really saying something about the history of continuity and change in tango as a genre. So that's one thing, is just to think about musical style and the meaning of that. The other thing is to think about the social function of tango music. And function, I don't mean just the commercial function or just because it's made for dancers, but really like, why is it important and what does it mean to people who are engaged with it today? And there's lots and lots and lots of different answers to this, but everybody who's engaged with it has some answer for themselves, in the sense that tango is something that today really does exist as like a very important but niche genre that people turn to because it matters to them, right? It's not just something they always grow up with, so to speak. So these functions include things like being socially popular music, music that speaks to contemporary experience, right? Contemporary life. Tango is what I call an alternative art music, right? Something in which people are dealing with formal and aesthetic questions through tango music. Again, the kind of, the music for dancing. There are many contemporary artists who are writing new music for dancers and to mobilize dancing. Though I know there's a lot of controversy between the dancers and the musicians too, but in my experience, especially in the United States, the live music and the dancing world is coming closer together than it was even 10 years ago in ways that are interesting. And then a whole variety of different avant-garde tendencies that are neat too. So again, I'm going to kind of outline some general trends, have Flora play a few listening examples, and invite you to kind of explore more on your own as you're able to. And I do encourage you to explore more. We live in a golden age of accessibility to this material, in the sense that a lot of artists in Argentina are putting their stuff on YouTube, putting their stuff on Spotify, circulating it in new and different ways that make it really easy to find if you know what you're looking for, than it was even just a couple years ago in that way too. Okay, so let me make sure I'm on track in terms of time here, and we'll just go ahead. So the first kind of trend I want to talk about is what I call, and they do not call themselves this, but I'm calling them this, is kind of modern traditionalists, okay? This includes groups like El Arranque that we were just listening to, the violinist and composer Ramiro Gallo, the Orquesta Escuela de Tango, which is both is a tango school orchestra where they train tango musicians, but also make recordings and things like that. And a lot of other artists who have come from this background. And what I mean by modern traditionalists is that these are artists, contemporary tango artists, who have a deliberate, very deliberate, conscious grounding in the styles and techniques of tango music that are associated with the Golden Age band leaders. And they've codified, and they've been like scientists of the Golden Age style and have taught themselves how to play this material, which then they, once they taught themselves how to do it in the 90s, used as a launching pad to create modern, innovative work that's new and original, exciting and fascinating and moving and emotional, but nevertheless very clearly grounded in the conventions of the genre, okay? And this is something we could do if we had more time, or if you were in one of my classes at Reed, where we could play that El Arranque song and go through every little feature of it and be like, okay, yes, this is from the Golden Age, this is from the Golden Age, this is from the Golden Age, without that ever sounding like Golden Age music, right? But everything they're working with builds from that kind of work that they inherited from that time period and that they developed. So again, that's a great example of an example that's grounded in tradition, and again, including the piece itself. Very deliberate decision to play a historical composition, right? In a new and original arrangement, and arranging is a part of the tango tradition as well, but playing this, something that's grounded in tradition, in a traditional piece, but takes it into new and frankly, very unexpected places. Like I dare you to go find out where the main melody of El Choclo is played for the first time in that arrangement, for example, right? Go check it out, okay? I'm not gonna have Flora play that example just because we heard it at the beginning, and again, you can-
I think I should play it a little.
You wanna play it? Okay, go ahead and play it.
I'll play a little bit, okay.
All right, okay, thank you. lot of static on that one.
I am very sorry. It sounds much better in reality. I will just ask people that they can click and listen to it after. It's a beautiful piece, but
It's suddenly like it's like avant-garde electronic music when you have that filter on it. It's kind of cool actually. But yeah, no, sorry for the technical sound there, but do return to that. And again, you can that example is from YouTube. You can find all this stuff very easily. And again, the melody is there. It's not like they're hiding it, but it's transformed, elaborated in ways that you wouldn't hear. You know, no one's going to mistake that for a golden age piece, I would argue. Okay, the second big trend I want to talk about is what I call the tango vanguard, and this is not my term. This is something that people talk about all the time. What I mean by it here is to talk about contemporary, meaning active today, composers and band leaders. And again, being a composer and a band leader kind of go together in tango in that it is a popular music, right? They're not just writing for orchestras or whatever. For like classical orchestras, but contemporary composers and band leaders who follow in the footsteps of Astor Piazzolla and his contemporaries, basically. Now, Piazzolla is someone who's a point of reference for many, many people. I'm sure when you broke out in your groups, I can imagine that many of you were like, wow, I heard Piazzolla, and that's my own history. I'll just speak to myself. I heard Piazzolla when I was in college as a jazz saxophone major, and it blew my mind, and we started a Piazzolla cover band, and like the rest is history, right? But Piazzolla being this person, a key figure from the post-Golden Age period, and the larger tango vanguard movement that he's associated with. So what is Piazzolla's version of the tango vanguard? Basically means the expansion of musical possibilities within tango via deliberate break, often violent breaks, with received tradition in tango, okay? So whereas the modern traditionalists are interested in cultivating the features of tango, the vanguard people, starting with Piazzolla and still today, kind of break with it in lots of different ways. Break with those traditions, primarily in the case of Piazzolla, through the incorporation or engagement with so-called outside genres and forms, especially jazz and Western art music. Now again, going back to the first part, I think it's complicated to think about what's inside and outside of tango, and that's a whole like academic conversation that we could have. But that's the story as Piazzolla told it himself and as is told in stories about him, really. There are many, many people working in this lineage, I would argue today, okay, including figures like Diego Schisi, Sonia Posetti, Juan Pablo Navarro, Agustin Guerrero, Maria Laura Antonelli, who you have examples of, all these kinds of figures. And they do not necessarily sound like Piazzolla at all. Okay, so they are not followers of Piazzolla in the sense that they're trying to create a Piazzolla sound, but they're invested in this kind of vanguard orientation towards tango, meaning that they can draw things from tango, draw things from other places, leave things from tango, leave things in other spaces, in other places. And that's exactly how it was explained to me by Diego Schisi, who is one of these contemporary composers who comes and works with us at Reed College. He teaches composition at Reed when we do our summer program. He says it just means that he's free to pick and choose between whatever he wants, right? I can take this from tango and leave what I don't want aside, right? The result here is creating like energetic, often very energetic, and again, kind of inspired by the kind of social, how to say it, or just the energy of tango as a music, even in its kind of alternative art music form, a music that's meant to get people moving, right? Even if it's not literally music for dancing. So it's energetic, but often very intricate music that happens in listening context. So Flora is going to play a short excerpt of a video that plays Diego Schisi's piece Astor de Pibe, which means Astor as a kid, which is an homage to Piazzolla, and again puts this relationship between Schisi and Piazzolla in directly. So we'll check out an excerpt of this.
All right, we're gonna see how this is gonna work. I think my computer is in a bit of overdrive, but let's see if this works. Just a minute. Oh well.
It's okay. Too bad about the sound, but that's all right. No worries. That again, as you saw there, that's a YouTube video of a live performance. You can find all this stuff again on our resources page that Flora's put together for us to turn to it. Okay, for the sake of time, let's move on. A third trend that I want to talk about is what I call new song tango music, or new tango canción, tango songs. This also is very diverse. The main the background thing to say is that tango songs as a genre or a subgenre, and lyrics in particular, are a tremendously significant component of the overall genre culture of tango. I talk about tango not just as music, not just as dance, not just music for dance, not just dance and music, right? Or the relationship there, but also lyrics, poetry, film, fashion, all this kind of stuff. But the trinity in my mind of like tango as a genre culture is music and dance and lyrics and letters, right? Poetry. And this goes back, again, we heard the piece, Angel Villoldo's piece, that's a song that he wrote lyrics to, El Choclo, from the very beginning. I should say, just as an anecdote, you don't often hear the original lyrics of El Choclo anymore. When you do hear lyrics to El Choclo, you almost always hear the lyrics that Enrique Santos Discépolo wrote for the lyrics in the 1940s. Not Villoldo's original lyrics. One place to start with listening to Tango Canción, if it's new to you, is with the work of Carlos Gardel. Carlos Gardel is the most emblematic figure of tango of all time. And he was a singer, right? A practitioner of tango song, and is like fascinating work to go through. One thing that's interesting here is you often hear a departure in terms of instrumentation and sound with tango song. A lot of the orquestas típicas from the Golden Age had singers, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, though a lot of their music was instrumental, but they would feature singers every once in a while, and singers became big stars. The Tango Canción tradition that Gardel participated in, and a lot of other people, his contemporaries, were generally a single singer with guitars, like guitar accompaniment, almost often 2 or 3 or 4 guitars playing along. One thing that's interesting here to think about, why does this matter today to contemporary artists who are working with Tango Canción or tango song, is because a lot of the themes that come up in tango, like loss, nostalgia, ambition, the trouble that ambition gets you into, gender roles, gender violence, I hate to say it, place names, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of these issues are still really important and current and relevant, right? But in new and different ways. Basically, you know, tango, especially earlier tango lyrics, are depicting a very topsy-turvy urban experience in Argentina in the teens and 20s. And unfortunately, that has been the kind of experience that's returned in a lot of ways in the 21st century as well. The point for now, and again, I write about this quite a lot in my book, if you're interested in getting into it in more detail. The main point I want to say here is just that lyrics are a space in which like really serious issues are worked out in tango and explored on an artistic level. So there's a lot of contemporary artists who are working along these lines. It's going to be fascinating for those of you who speak Spanish to hear this and understand it. They also have lyrics online, and tango lyrics are have been before the internet, were published in collections and appreciated as poetry, and that's still true today. So one example I want to play is by this group Bombay Buenos Aires that used to be called 34 Puñaladas, and they changed their name a couple years ago. And this is an original piece of theirs called La Sama that basically tells an incredibly bleak story of a man who's like abandoned all hope and is basically out walking towards death at his own hands. But it's a very tango story in the sense it talks about tango, it talks about place names in Buenos Aires, it does all those things. And then musically, you'll hear the single male singer, though you have female singers as well. You hear the male singer with a guitar ensemble that's doing a very contemporary sound that, again, is rooted in tango, the kind of rhythmic energy of tango, but departing from it in ways as well, too. So can you play an excerpt of that, please, Flora?
We're going to try.
We'll try.
so sorry. It looks like I have too much going on my computers and it's really
Okay.
hard to play the recordings.
No worries. Again, for everybody who's out there who's listening, all 78 of you, these are things you can all turn to really easily. So you're hearing a bit of my interpretation, and then you hear the sound as well. We didn't even get to this the lyrics there, but even in the introduction to that song, the part that we heard, you hear the guitar ensemble, you hear this kind of biting energy to it, referencing a kind of marcato pattern, but without really kind of giving it to you directly. Highly dissonant, right? Unresolved dissonances, just kind of edgy and biting. And they're using these kinds of sources that, again, you can find all those sources back in Golden Age Tango, but cultivating those to create an almost like cinematic effect for the atmosphere that they're developing here. Okay. Again, for the sake of time, I'll move on. And there's one last trend I want to talk about, though we could go on and on from here. But the last thing I want to talk about. Whoop.
It was an early excerpt.
That's great. Yeah. No, that actually fits the theme exactly well, because it's like chomping at the bit to get out and get at us, right? Which this is, I think, of contemporary tango music that has been locally described by artists there as what they call the tango of rupture. Which is a kind of local vanguard movement, I would call it, a local avant-garde or an internal avant-garde that has effectively reinvented tango. That's effectively reinvented tango as you know, by how to say it. Golden Age Tango, if you're not a tango dancer, is very old-fashioned, right? Let's just say it, right? And it's something like as if a young person today was really into Count Basie or something like that, right? And there, a lot of young people are into Count Basie, and that stuff is great art that everybody recognizes as such, but it's not something that has always spoken to younger people in the same way. How to say it? It's not spoken to younger generations at all, and certainly not in the same way that it did, for instance, to my grandmother who grew up dancing to that stuff, in the Dakotas, right? The kind of big band tradition of jazz. So this is something where younger people in Argentina in the 90s started turning towards Golden Age tango music as something that became socially relevant to them again, both because it had to do with history and tradition and identity and meaning, but also because it had to do with being, kick butt music, right? Being kind of in your face music. And a lot of Golden Age music is rhythmically driving, can rock the party, is musically rich, but also very exciting. And Pugliese in particular was the figure that a lot of these artists cited to me when I was working with them doing my research. So part of this tango of rupture, it has to do with a return to the orquesta típica as a format, with new orquesta típicas started forming kind of all over the place in Argentina during the 90s and the 2000s, and this is still basically going strong, with a group called the Orquesta Típica Fernández Fierro being like the emblematic and early, but still active example of this. And they're playing regularly in Argentina and beyond, and recording and stuff like that. And that's the example we're gonna hear from them in just a minute. There's also new groups that are departing from the Orquesta Típica format or the instrumentation, and also pushing new compositions in a way that hadn't been done before. And groups that do this are people like Astillero, which is a group by a guy named Julian Peralta, who's a composer and pianist. He was actually a founding member of the Orquesta Típica Fernández Fierro too, and is a bit of a mastermind of this whole tango of rupture scene. A group that is not around anymore called Rascasuelos that I like a lot, that you should like. They make what you're gonna hear, the Fernández Fierro, sound like easy listening music, right? So there's a lot of really in your face, energetic music here. Now, what does this mean by the tango of rupture, or like an internal avant-garde? What do I mean by that? That's what I mean is that like these artists are not breaking with tango by looking outside of it, the way the historical and the other tango vanguard did, Piazzolla and his followers and other people working in that lineage. They do not look for other genres from jazz for like an expanded sense of virtuosity, or from classical music for like a sense of what larger scale forms might look like. These are people who have turned to Golden Age tango and turned to that material and latched on to the features of it, particularly the rhythmic features of it, and then taken them and exaggerated them and performed them in a way that has never been done before, right? Which is again different from the kind of what I was calling the modern traditionalists that are about like kind of building upon the material that came from before. These guys are really about blowing it up, I would say, you know, and that's a hyperbolic way of putting it, but it's something to think of here. So what this means is when you hear this is especially taking like the rhythmic intensity that you hear in Golden Age tango, even in something like a Carlos Di Sarli marcato, taking that and pushing it to the nth degree, and you come up with music that is really, really, really rhythmically exciting. So the example we're going to play is by the Orquesta Típica Fernández Fierro. This is a piece called Comezón, which means like itch or itchiness. And that's exactly what it is. It's like the rhythm is an itch that they're scratching that they can't get rid of. This piece is from 2018, right? So it's really quite recent. And what you're going to hear is this like relentless repetition of this melodic motive that repeats and repeats and repeats, such that the rhythm and the melody kind of like collapse into one another. And this is one thing that I find really exciting about tango in general, right? Where you have the rhythm becomes the melody, and the melody is the rhythm, and they're not separable from one another in any way at all. The other thing, so for how kind of avant-garde this piece is going to sound, do note that this is an orquesta típica instrumentation. You're right, they got bandoneons, they got violins, they got the piano and the bass. So it's traditional in a lot of ways in that way too. And this is also a video. I don't know, Flora, if this is going to work or not, but you'll also, if you see the video, these, how to say it, they look like punk rockers. You know, these are people who got flashing lights. They perform on stage, big beards, kind of hipsters. I guess they're like aged hipsters, like, or Gen Xers or whatever. You know, but you're not going to mistake these guys for like the real cream, slicked hair of like Di Sarli or anyone like that. Okay. So Flora, if that works, it'd be great, but let's see.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to do the video. I think I have
Okay.
a bit of this issue. Just so everybody, I have 3 laptops running at the same time, so that might be part of the problem. But let's do a little bit of sound, and you really have to watch that video. It's worth watching. Let's listen.
So, right, that's not like a record on repeat, right? That's not like a stuck record, right? That's something that's the song, right? Where you have, again, this intense repetition, and that is what it is, right? And again, this very kind of, so I think that illustrates this point of being the kind of tango of rupture, kind of internal features of tango. You're hearing marcatos, you're hearing these other things, but taken to a level that you would never encounter in a golden age kind of context. And that material is really, really exciting. And again, speaks a bit to, like, I think the social function of the genre for this group, in the sense that, you know, the recordings are exciting, the video is better, hearing them live, they play every Wednesday in Buenos Aires, that piece, I mean, love it or hate it, like, you're gonna notice, you know what I mean? It's something that has a very strong impact, whether it's something you find appealing or repulsive, and I've heard people have all kinds of reactions, which is, of course, okay. There's lots of other stuff I could talk about, right? I think there's at least 2 things that I want to mention that we don't have time to get into and play examples for now. One of which is, you know, this development of American tango in the United States. And a lot of you who are probably on this call are involved in this, right? And thank you to the work you do and like for where it's going. But there is, in my opinion, like a distinct North American tango sound that's being developed over the last, you know, 10-ish years again, that is very exciting. And it's really, really interesting for me to see and hear as a fan and as a scholar and as a listener, to see like how that's developing, right? On the one hand, we could say, well, tango's been American, meaning US, something a part of US culture for more than 100 years, going back to the Banda Española example that we had. But this is music that is developing in new and different ways that's very exciting, that departs, is inspired by, you know, adheres to and departs from what's going on in Argentina as well. And that is also true of what's going on in France and going on in other places in Europe and things like that as well. So that's really exciting kind of international trends. And then the other thing I want to mention is that there's like a very active like tango feminist movement in Buenos Aires right now. Or the real way to say it is that there's a hugely historically significant women's movement taking place in Argentina over the last 5-ish years that tango has contributed to and been a part of in really important ways as well. And this comes to, you know, from more space for women artists to perform, for, you know, to very serious critique and transformation in the content of lyrics, women composers, all kinds of things like this that I think are really fascinating. And there's a lot of really exciting artists, some of whom I've mentioned here. Sonia Posetti is a wonderful contemporary woman tango artist. Maria Laura Antonelli, and many, many others who are doing that. And that again, you could write a whole book just about that trend, but I think it's really important, especially given, you know, and again, since it's an audience, I'm assuming a lot of you do tango dancing, you know, tango dancing, to its tremendous credit, has been a wonderful space for engaging what gender means, right, over the last 10, 20 years, right, whether it's in leading and following or specific tango queer spaces or all those kinds of things. Tango dance has been at the vanguard of dealing with those issues in Argentina and elsewhere. And I think that's amazing. And tango music is kind of maybe catching up now a little bit. And I find that very inspiring and not just interesting, but important. So, okay, for the sake of time, I'm gonna leave it there, Flora, and I don't know if we're doing more questions or how you wanna do it, but thank you everybody for listening to me.
Thank you so much. I would love to take a few more questions from our participants, if you don't mind. If you haven't asked your questions in the chat, now is the time. I see a few here. So Professor Luker, from Murphy, how do you see folklore involved in contemporary tango? Love the bumbo drum.
Oh yeah, that's my drum back there, right?
Oh, that's what it is, okay.
Yeah, I thought this would be a good background, right? Like books and drum, I look like a music professor. No, this is just my office too. The relation between folkloric music and tango music is super interesting. On the one hand, there's a lot of different stuff you could say. Folkloric music is like, what is the main thing to say? How to say it? Like folklore music is like folk music here in the sense that it's been like fully commercial, popular genres for many decades. It's like listening to Bob Dylan and everything that's happened since then. So that version of folkloric music is just a part of who contemporary Argentine artists are. It's like the music they grew up listening to in many cases, that and rock music. And now different kinds of hip hop and stuff like that as well, and you know, reggaeton, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one relationship to it. There are artists who are kind of like, how to say it? Then there is a kind of contemporary folklore music scene in Buenos Aires that is just as robust, if not even more robust, than the contemporary tango scene. And the artists, you know, I could name as many trends in that world as we're naming in the tango world. So that's another thing. And then the third thing is that there's a lot of overlap in those worlds. And there are artists who are primarily tango artists, but who will do folkloric music, or people who don't work on genres, like don't anchor themselves in a genre in particular at all, or who use genres as their point of references that they can hear or depart from. A lot of exciting people, I think of like Ezequiel Mantega, who's a pianist and composer who's been involved with the project at Reed. He's someone who I think of as like a contemporary Latin American artist. And in fact, it goes beyond Argentina. He has connections with people in Brazil and people in Colombia and elsewhere, where they're drawing upon, but again, departing from local musical forms in ways that are really significant. And you could also just say, okay, well, tango is another kind of Argentine folklore. You know, you could just say that too, so which is a different way. Anyway, lots to say about that. That's a great question.
Great. I just want to warn our audience, we might go a few minutes over. If you need to go, no problem, but we just want to, I'd like to take a few more questions and then we'll close the session. All right, Amy has a question. Amy asks, can you speak to the relationship between the three contemporary trends you spoke about?
Can I speak to the relationship amongst them? Sure. The relationship is, how to say it? I mean, they're all like diverse, because I was grounding my discussion of contemporary trends within Argentina and within Buenos Aires in particular, they're all like diverse trends within a local scene. So they're all part of like a much larger whole, the way like different styles, whatever, a lot of you are in DC, like the way go-go music is related to hip hop, is related to funk, is related to other things, right? Like that's the kind of thing that like that, there's that diversity within a local scene. There are also, you know, often colleagues, people that were initially like professional rivals now being colleagues or being people who have worked together. They are also, you know, distinct from one another. And you know, I think as a listener, part of the diversity of it that's exciting is a lot of them are pushing one another to do new and better and more rigorous stuff. You know what I mean? Where this is a lot of the, and this is something that is unique about tango compared to like indie rock in Portland, for instance, where it's like all the artists, or most artists who are like of my generation, the people I was talking to who turned to this music did so very deliberately and for very deliberate reasons, aesthetic and political and historical and otherwise. And so they're not doing it just for fun. They're doing it because it matters. And that pushes things to go in new and different directions, I would say. Then there's a relationship in the sense that, like, you know, the institutional infrastructure, record labels, performance venues, media outlets, etc., like all feed into this as well too. So they're related in that way as well. We shouldn't forget that this is still like commercial music, even though the contemporary artists would not tell you that. There's not much money to be made in it now, but anyway, still important.
Perfect. Okay, let's take one more question. Can you speak on why historically drums never made it into tango bands? What was the reason?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. That's another complicated question. It's something that people have speculated about a lot and don't exactly know why. There are some groups that have had percussion, including early in the 1920s and stuff like that, or including drum sets and stuff. So they do find their way in certain ways or not. One version of this, I do not adhere to any of these, and I'm going to say now that I just don't know, okay? One version has to do with the denial of Afro-descendant culture and experience in Argentina. Okay, where they're saying like, well, we're not going to have percussion in our music because that speaks to the African diaspora. Music does not work that way, so I do not agree with that, though there's people who've written whole books and would fight me all night long about that one. Other examples include things like, for instance, Matt Karush, who's a historian who lives in DC, actually, who works, I want to say, at George Mason. I don't remember right now. He's written fast. He's a historian of early 20th century Argentina. Wrote a book where he says that, you know, percussion fell out of tango or never got developed in tango because in the 1920s that jazz became so popular in Argentina that tango bands wanted to differentiate themselves from jazz by like not having that kind of swing and not doing that kind of stuff. I don't know if I believe that either. You know, I think one thing you can say is that, you know, one of the things that's interesting and amazing about tango is that you can have very powerful dance music that can get hundreds of bodies moving through the power of the orchestra itself without having percussion, right? You do have these kinds of percussive effects and the kinds of intense rhythmic articulations that do develop in tango, I would argue, come from that, of like, okay, how do you get people moving when you don't have a drum set just to do it? And you do it by developing marcatos and syncopas and these other kinds of things that get developed. So another way, I'm not trying to cop out of that answer. It's a really complicated question. And there's lots of different answers to it. And really, I would say nobody really knows the direct answer. Though again, artists themselves could certainly speak to why they choose to or not to have percussionists play in their music now and historically. So.
All right. Thank you, Professor Luker. I'm going to ask you the last two questions, which
Sure.
are, oh, I'm getting a message. We have more questions. I mean,
I'm happy to go. I'm happy to answer more questions. I can try to be more quick, and then I'll also say to everybody that I'm happy to be in touch with anybody out there. You know what I mean? You can look up the Reed College website. My email address is on there. I'm a so-called public figure. Like, I'm happy to be in touch with you if we're not able to answer your question you have now, or if you want, you know, further resources or to get pointed in a certain direction or whatever. I'm happy to do what I'm able to do for that. So
let's take a few more. It's such a treat to have you, and you really have an answer to a lot of quick questions. So let's keep going. Are there any jazz musicians who have incorporated tango?
Yes. Oh boy. There was the band, the New York Tango Trio, back in the day, right? The leader tragically died, who they were doing that. There's, you know, Pablo Aslan, who is, you know, an Argentine musician who's lived in New York for many years, who does an amazing, amazing kind of jazz tango. I don't even want to call it fusion, but kind of bridges the genres in unique ways that I would highly recommend people checking that out. So, and then there's a lot of other like specific examples of people who are bridging things. There's certainly a lot of these artists like Diego Schizzi or people like that. Like Diego has a degree in jazz performance from a university in Florida, I think, a master's degree. So they are very fluent in jazz and understand jazz. And then there's a really interesting question, which is that, you know, like earlier on, I was speaking to how tango was one of the early transnational genres, and a lot of early jazz is really influenced by tango. So one interesting example that I often play for this is St. Louis Blues, which is like a foundational recording in jazz history. Like I think one of the first things that's in the Smithsonian collection of classic jazz. The bridge, W.C. Handy, right? Bridge, tango, and labeled as such. People don't, you know, when you want to talk about genres in silos and stuff, they're like, oh, that's the Latin tinge, or oh, people don't talk about it at all. But no, it's because W.C. Handy was listening to tango and recorded tango and put tango into that. So, you know, there's that deeper influence as well, I would argue.
All right, Ramu asked, do you think any of the current bands will stand the test of time?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I could say how and why. I mean, they're making it, okay. Like, look, great art is great, right? I mean, I'm an ethnomusicologist, I'm a music scholar, so I don't really think in terms of like aesthetic greatness or not, but certainly a lot of the music that's going on now is of high aesthetic value and worthy of analysis and worthy of like deep listening and deep interpretation and like, you know, going for it. Like you can bust. In fact, there's the book that recently came out, Tracing Tangueros, by Kristen Wedland and Casey Link. I don't know if anyone knows that. That's basically a music theory book of tango. It's in English. It's pretty dense, but pretty great, you know, and they do it. Kristen Wedland's a card-carrying music theorist and does that. So it's aesthetically excellent, formally complex. But then I think more importantly for me is that it's like socially relevant. It's important, you know, and as contexts change and things like that, you know, things don't remain in, how to say it, the context in which things are urgent don't remain the same. But a lot of art that stands the so-called test of time certainly does transcend those contexts and can continue to be relevant. So I would say a lot of the contemporary artists are certainly doing that. Within the course of tango history, like tango specifically, absolutely. They're talking about the contemporary period. Like when I started doing my research and wrote my first book, I didn't know what to call it. Even today, I'm calling it contemporary trends, right? Like what's going on today? There's been a discourse in Argentina for a long time now about a new golden age of tango. And what that means of like many people playing it and becoming newly relevant and people circulating repertoire and there being, one of the things somebody asked about the relationship amongst the different contemporary trends, this is one way people talk about is that there's the rebirth of styles, right? The way the different golden age band leaders had their distinct styles, there are distinct styles again now. And that is another way that I think makes it historically significant, absolutely.
Last question, and I think this one's going to be hard to answer shortly, but could you speak a bit about the origin of tango in Argentina versus Uruguay?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, that Argentina versus Uruguay in terms of like where tango came from and who's like the, you know, there's a kind of competition amongst the two places about claiming ownership of it, so to speak, right? This gets most heated with the case of Carlos Gardel in particular, and I'm not even going to go there right now. That's complicated. My take on it is less one of like, well, chicken or egg or who came first or whatever. But, you know, geographically, if you look at Buenos Aires, the city of Buenos Aires, and it's important to remember, tango is really the music of that city. We talk about it as Argentine tango, but it's really the music of this single city and then expanded from there. And that single city is on the other side of a river from Montevideo, Uruguay, which is the main metropolitan center in Uruguay. And you can get back and forth real easily. You know, today it takes what, like an hour on the ferry or something. So I don't think of them, I think of them less as like competitors or like, you know, dual claims to this thing, and more as a space in which a continuity, right? We think of them as different countries and different cultures and different histories, but really there's more continuity than there is difference. at least when it comes to tango in my mind. And this is validated, I would say, you know, when tango was declared intangible cultural heritage of humanity by UNESCO in 2009, it was declared as a joint Argentine-Uruguayan thing. It wasn't Argentine tango, it was tango of Argentina and Uruguay. So that's the kind of story that it's been developed since then. And that's my general take on it. Now, again, I'm able to say that because I'm not personally invested in these as an Argentinian person or as an Uruguayan person or as someone who would be invested in them in different ways. And so it's like, you can be like, well, easy enough for you to say, Mr. Professor from Oregon. But that is my kind of historical interpretation of it, is that it's more about continuity than it is about difference.
All right, and while I pull up the last slide, why don't you tell us about your current research and what's going to happen with Tango for Musician? I think it was set to happen this summer. I was looking forward to it. Is it going to happen in the future?
Yeah, I'll just cut to the chase to talk about Tango for Musicians. You know, it's this week-long intensive summer camp that we do here, Tango Camp, right? That we do at Reed College. We bring up artists from Argentina, many of whom we've talked about and listened to today, to do hands-on, you know, learning to play. Tango is, one thing about tango is, like jazz and like a lot of popular music, is that a lot of the stuff that's the most important to learn about it isn't in the music itself, isn't in the notes that are notated, right? And it's a really nice opportunity to get to hear from, like, and learn, you know, hands-on from master practitioners how to do it. Unfortunately, because of the situation that we're all living through right now, we've had to postpone our 2021 edition because of the virus, which is, you know, for better for worse, the reality we're facing. But we have postponed it till 2021, late June. If you're interested in coming, there's a lot of information at reed.edu/tango. We don't have fixed dates yet, but it's going to be the last week in June. It's always in late June. We have financial aid. We're open to beginners. If you're a dancer and you don't play, you can come and audit and, like, participate without playing. If you're someone who's a dancer who, you know, used to play and want to get back into it, it's a great space for that. We've done a lot of hard work to make it rigorous and rewarding, but also fun and inclusive of everybody who, regardless of what level of experience you have, you know. So it's a space that we want everybody. It's like a liberal arts college, right? Like, it doesn't matter where you start. We want you to start here. It's not trying to get everybody here. It's trying to get from wherever you are ahead, you know, and that's how Tango for Musicians works. My main collaborator is a woman, Paulina Fine, in Buenos Aires. She's the artistic director of it. And it's really pretty great, if I do say so myself. So, I mean, I would love to, I can't see any of you here, but I would love to see you in Oregon when we can all do it again, hopefully, you know, around this time next year.
Well, everybody, this takes us to the end of today's seminar. I want to thank you so much for coming today. You've been an amazing audience. Don't forget to check out, Professor Luker has put together a Go Further list. If you liked what you listened to today, keep clicking. We have more links in there. You can discover more about the contemporary tango scene. Professor Luker's book, The Tango Machine, is available on Amazon. You have the link in the playlist, tangoformusician.com. And I want to give a shout out to my friend Lee Gimple, who spent 3 hours doing a tech rehearsal for me for this presentation. I apologize for the technical issues, but you've been absolutely amazing, and we will see you next Sunday. Bye, everybody.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Flora.
Thank you. Bye. Oh no.